On January 21st, 2017, I had the privilege and the honor to participate in the Women's March on Washington. I know that many of you have seen coverage of this historic event in the press, and yet I wanted to share with you my experience and some of the voices from the street. I had the opportunity to interview individuals about their reasons for being there and to hear their stories. Some of those stories I'll share with you today. So, how did this all get started? The Women's March actually began shortly after President Trump had won the presidency, and a woman who lived in Hawaii, a retired attorney, and a grandmother, went to bed after the election feeling very discouraged and woke up feeling even worse the next day. She decided to do something about it, and the next night she created a Facebook event page with the help of some friends in the online environment. Her page called for a march on Washington after Trump's inauguration. Before she went to bed, she had 40 responses to her Facebook page, and when she woke up, she had more than 10,000. On the other side of the country, a fashion designer named Bob Bland had the same idea. She was the woman who was responsible for designing the Nasty Woman and the Bad Ombre t-shirts during the presidential election. She wrote on Facebook, "I think we should build a coalition of all marginalized allies and just do this. We need folks from every state and city to organize their communities locally, and who wants to join me?" And thus began the early beginnings of the Women's March. Bob Bland pulled together various protest pages, contacted some activists in New York to consider co-chairing this event and figure out how to make it really happen. And they began reaching out to various groups to join in the efforts of this march. I'll refer you to the Women's March website where you can see a list of all of the different sponsors, the co-chairs, the national organizing team, and the many different diverse viewpoints that they share. The organizers began pushing information out to prospective marchers via Facebook and email. They did this in order to share information rapidly, and I was getting information about the march from a variety of different sources with fairly consistent messages. They began to send out official information so that the stuff being shared was accurate and coming from the organizers. One of the real questions in the beginning is what to call it. Initially, some activists felt like they should call it the Million Pussy March, but others felt that this perpetuated a demeaning slur that was used by Trump during the election. When I first heard about it, I heard it called the Million Women March, but that name was discarded because it was too reminiscent of the 1997 protests by African American women, and they didn't want to detract from that other important historic event. So the final name was the Women's March on Washington, which invoked Martin Luther King Jr.'s Civil Rights March of 1963. After checking with his daughter, they received her blessing to call the march with this name. So, how did I learn about this? My son called me the day after the election, extremely distraught. He hadn't slept all night. He was so upset over the outcome of the election and just feeling at a real loss of what to do. It didn't take about a week before he called me back and invited me to the march. He said, "Mom, I have to do this. I would love to do this by your side. I know that you were involved in many of these efforts throughout your life, and I think it'd be an honor to invite you to join me and my family in this march." It didn't take too long for me to say yes. For me, one of the things that I've really been concerned about and that I was interested in participating was from that professional standpoint of being a registered nurse. At one point in my career, I worked in family planning, and I know how important it is to have this access to contraceptive services for young people in our community. I've also championed support for health care and access to care because I believe, as does the American Nurses Association, that health care is a right. I grew up in an era before Roe v. Wade. I was a senior in high school in 1973 when Roe v. Wade passed. I was a good girl. I sang in the church choir. I was not sexually active. And yet, I knew that there was a place that you could go in downtown Denver in case you, quote, got into trouble. It was one of those back room abortion clinics where women in my city of Denver could go for an illegal abortion. And for me, I don't want to go back there. The thought of knitting needles and coat hangers and herbs and abuse of women to deal with unwanted pregnancies to me is inhumane, and I wanted to stand up and say so. So there were a lot of preparations and plans ahead of the march. We had lots of conversations about what to bring, what to wear. I know as I talked with individuals in Grand Junction, one of their first comments is, well, it's going to be so cold in Washington, D.C. Why did they decide to have it in January? And it was so interesting that the immediate thing that people talked about was the weather and that it was going to be cold. And I thought, I'm a Colorado girl. I'm used to spending an entire day out in the mountains, skiing and hiking and playing on my ATV, and I think I probably have the gear necessary for it. But we talked a lot about, other things we needed to bring, whether it was wet wipes because we didn't think there would be toilet paper, or snacks and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and water. Um, we were beginning to get information from the march about, carrying things in a clear plastic container because there were security checkpoints along the way, and really things that they were doing to assure the safety of the marchers. So I arrived in Baltimore with my rain gear and a number of pink hats that I had knit for my family, and we geared up and mapped our way to how we were going to get to the march. As I began to prepare for the march, the closest flight I could find into Washington, D.C. was into Baltimore. There were no hotel rooms available and anywhere near Washington, D.C., so the first 2 nights we stayed in a hotel on the outskirts of the Baltimore airport, and then the last 2 days that I was in the area, we stayed at a cabin at a campground about halfway between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So on the day of the march, we got up very early. We had to get 2 kids ready because my son and his wife chose to bring their kids to the march. We drove from Baltimore down to the campground area where we knew we could catch a bus to the subway, and then from there we could walk to the beginning of the march. It was amazing to me that the first people that I met at the bus stop were 2 nursing students, and so the very few people that I interviewed were 2 nursing students from Tennessee.
Okay.
Yeah.
I came because, people are posting a lot of stuff on Facebook. I just always repost, like, women's rights, equality, and everything, but I wasn't actually out in the community doing stuff. And so it's good, since I have the ability to come, why not go and support people and, like, you meet people in other communities that might have other ideas, and you bring that back to where you are and make change and be motivated, and
That's great.
that's why I came.
Is there one specific issue that you're concerned about?
Definitely Planned Parenthood and just my rights to my body. A lot of my family supports Trump, or just like supports, I shouldn't have the right to do what I want with my body, and I want to stay as involved as I can in that decision so that I can kind of get it towards my direction.
Awesome. How about for you?
Basically, I just wanted to show the government that there is support for women's rights and there is support for women's health care and Planned Parenthood, and to not defund it, because those are vital resources that women, especially women who live in poverty, need to do. And we want to be able to control our bodies and be able to say, yes, no, we do not want to continue this pregnancy. We want to be able to control, because this is our bodies and they shouldn't be able to tell us what to do.
Awesome. So you're nursing students?
Yes.
And tell me the school again.
University of Tennessee at Chattanooga.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
One of the things that was wonderful is that the Metro bus for Baltimore region actually picked us up right at the campground, so we didn't have to get too far away. Getting there did require some perseverance. This is some pictures of us loaded into the bus. Some people were going to the march, others were going to work, but you began to get a sense of the excitement of those people going to the march. Here we are in the back of the bus with all of our signs and big smiles on our face as we started our journey. From there, we were headed to the second stop on the Washington, D.C. subway system, which was their metro. And when we first got there, I wish I would have taken pictures of the line that we saw snaked around the building. There were probably about 400 people waiting in line. And that was when I really began to get a sense of how big this march was really going to be. Because for me, I thought getting on the subway at that particular point we'd be pretty good because we were at the end of the line. I was wondering if we were going to even make it for the march when I saw that line, but then we found out that the people waiting in line were actually waiting there to purchase the ticket to get on the metro. And we were thoughtful ahead of time in some of the preparations and pre-purchased some preloaded cards. So we pushed past the line and were able to get onto the subway. The subway cars were full of individuals headed to the march, lots of pink hats, lots of signs, lots of excitement and enthusiasm, and we were packed in there very tight. There were people of all ages and shapes and color. The middle photo, the gentleman in the blue hat, his wife was in a wheelchair, and we certainly created lots of space and room for her as we crammed people onto the subway. It was amazing that instantly we began sharing stories with people that were headed to the march of all different kinds of ages. At each of the metro stops along the way, it was clearly apparent that our subway car was full, the whole train was full, and although the subway had to stop at each of these stops to allow people to get off, there was no room for anybody else to get back on. We were crammed pretty tight in there. And one of the things that for me was amazing is how kind and polite people were. And when the doors opened and people weren't able to get on, there were still cheers and still excitement as people waved to each other, with promises that there would be another train coming along behind with plenty of room for them. So we were really grateful we actually made it onto the subway ride, and she was there with her sister. Both of them had brought their daughters to the march, and I asked them the reasons for being there, and it was really clear that they were concerned about creating a better world for their daughters. They did not like the messages that they heard about women during the presidential election. They were very clearly in favor of being able to make the decisions for themselves about their own bodies in terms of having a choice about that. But really for them it was about their daughters. They were there marching for their daughters. My daughter shared that same sentiment with them, and it was one of our first points of real connection across racial lines in this particular case. Our first impressions of stepping off of the subway was of how big the crowd was in the subway, and every direction that we could see was packed with people. I've been to Washington, D.C. many times. I've ridden the subway many times. So I kind of knew the process for getting off the trains and getting up out of the subway. And as we rounded the corner after stepping off the platform, I was just struck that it was wall-to-wall people, and that it was going to take us a while to get up out of there, because at the very end of the subway there is a escalator and some stairs to move up to the street level, and we were nowhere even near that, but it was a choke point for getting people up out of the subway. Despite the crowds, it was so exciting to see the energy of people, the fact that they were holding up their signs, they were beginning to cheer and connect with each other about why they were there and what their reasons were for being in the march. It was very positive, it was kind, despite the fact it was wall-to-wall people, shoulder to shoulder, packed in as tight as they could be. There was kindness, there was love, and there was a real sense of helping each other to get to the end of that particular hallway that we were looking at. It didn't matter that we were at the street level. It didn't matter that we were stuck in the subway. The march started happening right there in the subway. We saw people lifting signs. We saw chants and cheers as people began to share why they came there in a very vocal way with each other. So it was very energizing, and it didn't matter that it was taking us over an hour to get out of the subway. The march started happening. People didn't need to wait to get up into the National Mall to begin to engage in expressing their viewpoints and their opinions about why they were there.
Stand up, fight back! Is that on? Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back! Yeah. Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back! Stand up, fight back!
When we finally did make it up, it felt pretty good to get some fresh air after being packed that close with that many people for so long with various layers of Gore-Tex and fleece and scarves and mittens and things. It felt good to feel the fresh air. And already we could see people marching on the street, and we were so excited. At this point, we were still about 4 blocks off of the National Mall, and on the far left you'll see the view from the L'Enfant Plaza station. We could see people marching down the street in front of us, as well as people on the next street, and we could hear the sound of the crowd from the National Mall, and we were about 4 blocks away. This was about the time I started trying to log into the webinar I was trying to do while we were coming up out of the subway. It obviously took us 2 hours longer than we anticipated to get there on the subway and to actually get out of the subway. So this was around noon, and it was real clear that we couldn't get a very good signal, obviously not in the subway, but even on the street level. I later learned that they had damped down all of the cell phone service as a security precaution, just to limit the possibility of somebody actually triggering some kind of violent event with a cell phone. So cell coverage at that point was maybe 1 bar. At the time, I figured it was you get a whole lot of women and men together with their cell phones and you totally overwhelm the system. But it was worth a try to try and log onto the webinar. I think I may have been live for a few moments, about 12:25 from this particular location. If you got to see anything great, you might have seen me interview a few people there. But it was, I gave it the old college try. As when we first got off the subway, it was noon. We'd been on the road traveling since about 6:45, so we decided the first thing we needed to do was to quickly grab a little peanut butter sandwich we had brought along and make sure that we fed the kids. So we just paused for a moment before we joined the street and had a quick bite of some food. We didn't know where we were going or what we were doing from that point on, but we knew that we needed to take care of first things first. So never tasted a peanut butter sandwich that tasted any better than it did that day standing outside of this subway station. Let's kind of orient you a little bit to the National Mall. Here's the U.S. Capitol, anchors one end of it. The Lincoln Memorial anchors the other end. Here's the Washington Monument and the White House. You see many of the Smithsonian buildings along the mall. And L'Enfant Plaza, where we were coming out of the subway, is over here. It doesn't look like it's very far away, but as far as city blocks go, it's about 4 blocks when we came up out of the subway. The actual activities of the march, the speakers, there was a platform set up right over here off of 3rd Street, and that's where the speakers were happening. So we were many blocks away from there. We didn't hear the speakers. We could hear the crowd cheering, but we couldn't hear anything like that was going on. Here's a view that a reporter took from the steps of the Capitol looking down the National Mall during the march towards the Washington Monument, and then you can see the Lincoln Memorial way down there. This is the Smithsonian Castle. It's a very common image that you see in the National Mall and sort of a landmark. The speakers are right here. This is where the the platform was where the speakers were speaking. We actually never saw this site. We didn't get to actually be near the mall until probably about 4 o'clock that day. But just to give you a sense of what it looked like from the Capitol building looking out. This was sort of our experience with the mall. Again, this sort of highlights where the speakers were. Here's the subway station. When we joined the crowd marching on the street, we moved down D Street. We moved up 12th Street for a while. We couldn't really get any closer. This was pretty much all solid people once we got to 12th Street. As we looked up the streets we walked by, it was solid people up all of those streets. But we were able to work our way through the crowd up to Independence Avenue. We then tried to we knew the speakers were off to our right, so we tried to move up a little bit and we backtrack a bit. But really there was not getting any closer, and I'll kind of tell you about our little journey and back down into here in a little bit. As we joined the crowd on the street, it felt good to actually move and march after standing still for a long time. You'll see me there on the left with my little clear plastic bag of snacks and treats and hand wash stuff and all of the things that I had packed for the day. I'm obviously really excited to be there, and as you look around me, you'll see different ages of people and sizes and shapes and colors, and I felt really excited about being a part of this amazing group of people. The common thing that people would say is, where are you from and why are you here and what are you going to do when this is all over? And it was so fun to hear some consistent messages from people about their concerns about health care and women's rights and wanting to honor people who were vulnerable in our society and not to really fight to protect those freedoms for all people in our country.
Actually feels like we're marching. We're avoiding the standing for 3 hours. Yes, exactly. Yes, that was my intention too. Standing for 3 hours is not fun. Marching, absolutely. All right, girls. All right, good ladies. All right. Good ladies.
It was kind of funny because they had recommended ahead of time that we couldn't bring backpacks. We could each bring a clear bag with kind of our lunch or what we needed for the day, and that we would be going through security checkpoints. And really, that might have been happening on the National Mall, but we never saw any checkpoints. We were, again, part of this massive group of people, and there was kindness everywhere. There were people that were full of joy and excitement, lots of cheers, but it really wasn't, we never saw any checkpoints, but we all had our little clear plastic bags and our little treats for the day. Everybody was fairly self-sufficient. There was a lot of sharing that was going on. If people were hungry or they needed a Kleenex, people were sharing what they had with them along the way. It didn't take us long to realize that this is as close as we were going to get to the National Mall. And I know that my son was, I think, kind of disappointed. I think he wanted to be a part of the mall. And I had to say, this is the march. We are here. This is happening right where we are right now. It started happening in the subway, and it is right here. It didn't matter what was going on in the National Mall, because what was happening among the people where we were sharing of stories and lots of cheers and chants, and we're here, and we may be 8 blocks away from where everything else is happening that was being publicized on CNN. But this was the march. As they talk about the size of the crowds, I really wonder if they were counting all of us that were 4 blocks away as part of the crowd, because it certainly doesn't show up on some of the pictures that you see of the crowds that were there that day of the march. As we got packed in close together again. It was exciting for me to look around and to see the signs and the various issues that people wanted to communicate, handmade signs and things that were on their heart that day as they were at the march.
Feeling that the near future would present many obstacles, confrontation, and division. My immediate thought after hearing the election results.
Which Rachel?
Ask you why are you here, Mom?
Because I have to show her that we don't have to put up with garbage.
And this is your daughter. Where are you from?
Annapolis, Maryland.
All right,
Yeah, we're
great.
close
How
by.
old are you? 9. What do you think of all this?
Crazy!
It is crazy, isn't it? That's awesome. Thank you. So why are you here today?
I'm here because I believe in human rights, and I am not a fan of the way the election went.
Yeah?
I'm here because I'm a healthcare worker, and I believe that women should have equal access to any and all care that they need.
That's great. What type of healthcare worker? Because I teach a nursing class. That's what this is for.
Yeah, we're actually all in physical therapy school.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So, are there concerns about how the ACA changes might impact your profession? Or?
Definitely. I think that there's a lot of reimbursement for preventative care, which is something that as PTs we're really excited to become involved in. And, you know, moving people towards healthier lifestyles and actually getting reimbursed for those services. And I think that it's pretty scary that that's going to get taken away.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
One of the things that we sort of realized when we were packed in with all those people on the edge of the march was that there weren't any bathrooms around. One of the things they had told us ahead of time of the march, so that there would be areas where there were porta potties, and we had a map to see where all the porta potties were. And I realized we were about 4 blocks away from any of those porta potties, and there were probably 100,000 people between us and those porta potties. So we began to realize that we'd been traveling since 6 a.m. We had little kids with us, and that was going to be something that we probably needed to take care of. So we began exploring. We walked back, and these are some photos not that day, but actually ones that I pulled off of the internet. We walked back up to this L'Enfant Plaza area, which is kind of over in this area on this little map of DC. And there were along this parkway, you'd see one porta potty, and then a little ways later you'd see 2, and then up the hill you'd see 2 more. And I realized that was it. That was what we had access to. And there were 100 people standing in line to use those 1 or 2 porta potties. So we moved up the hill to try and get away from the major part of the crowd to see if the lines were any shorter, and they weren't. So we decided to pick one, and we started standing in line. We were in line about 20 minutes, and it really wasn't moving very fast. And then we began to hear reports from people that they had been in line for 40 minutes and they hadn't been there, and that the porta potties were obviously overflowing and full already. So we kind of bit our tongues and went, okay, this is going to be interesting, and how are we going to keep these kids safe in there? And it was about that time that some people walked in front of this building and walked over to us and said, go into this building. And there was a place you could get down the side of the building. There's a guy there that will take you downstairs, and he's letting you use the bathrooms in this building. This building is the National Transportation and Safety Board building. It is a secure government facility, and this man who works there on the weekend was taking people downstairs to a bathroom. There was no wait, and then we came back upstairs, and it was just amazing. This guy was a good Samaritan along the way that just said, oh my gosh, I have to help. And I can't even begin to tell you what a difference he made in our day. So we took care of business and got everybody situated, and then headed back down L'Enfant Plaza back to the march. And so what you see at the bottom is sort of us coming back down off of L'Enfant Plaza, and there was a huge crowd of people here, and we just chose to stay in this area. We could move around a little bit. We weren't packed in like sardines. It was a little bit easier on the kids, and we began to once again engage and connect with the people on the street. As we did so, you see smiles, you see people talking, you see people concerned about each other. We couldn't hear the speakers, and yet we were the speakers. We were the ones that were telling the story about why we were there and what our reasons were. I saw lots of pink hats. I also saw a lot of kind buttons. Penzi Spice Company had shipped out these little kind buttons to people all around the country to share with those people who were coming in on bus. And everywhere we looked, we saw these little kind buttons on people's hats or on their lapels. And it was just a reminder to each other that we were all in there in a very nonviolent, in a way that we were respectful of each other and just helping everybody out along the way.
So tell me why you wanted to march.
Well, I think number one, I'm a parent and I want to protect the rights of my children. For me personally, women's reproductive rights are paramount, and women's access to health care. Everyone's access to health care. For me specifically as a woman, that is my personal concern. But I am an advocate of human rights for all, equality for all, and most specifically for me as an individual, women's reproductive rights.
You chose to bring your kids to the march.
Yes, I did.
Tell me about what led you to that decision.
It felt imperative that this was a family affair because it affects all of us. I felt that they needed to witness and be a part of their own lives from the very beginning, their own rights, their own democracy from the beginning of their lives, and this seemed like the time to really begin that for them.
All right, thank you. So what are you going to do after the march is over?
Continue talking, continue to be active, and I'll be doing lots of calls to my representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, as well as more locally. And I'm also involved with a women's activist group called Women's Activists for Love and Solidarity. So I'll be continuing my work there and expanding that.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to share with you some of the signs. Some of these you've seen on CNN. I'll share you the signs that we were looking at from the street. And I didn't even begin to get all of them, but I'll share with you a few of them that we saw. I love this contrast of the sign on the right, resist much, obey little, with all of the parking signs telling us what to do and where to go. It just seemed to be a little bit ironic there. Some professional organizations had printed signs for people to carry, like NARAL. I know Emily's List had a bunch of signs, but most of them were handmade with magic markers and crayons and paint. And for me, that tells me that people were really speaking from their heart in the signs that they were making. They were in English, they were in Spanish, they represented multiple perspectives, viewpoints, and yet it was democracy in action, people being able to have a voice.
Her body, her
choice! Her body, her choice! Her body, her choice! Her body, her choice!
I was a little concerned when my son and his daughter decided to bring their kids, but they were really committed to sharing this experience with them, and I thought with Nana Christie along that we would probably navigate that pretty well. At one point I handed my phone to my granddaughter who was in a stroller during the entire march. So this was her view of the march, the backs of people's legs, their feet. There was a woman with a walker right next to her, so she took a picture of that. She took a selfie, so I thought I'd just share with you her perspective of the view from the stroller. And it was amazing. She didn't didn't create much fuss at all at the tender age of 3.5. She was excited. She was giggling and talking to people. And of course, they were very enamored with her because she's such a bright little light and energy. My grandson, who's 7, was there, and there were times that he was on his daddy's shoulders. There was times he was marching, and occasionally he got in the stroller and we let Eleanor walk. I think a lot has been said in the press about the speakers. We never heard any of the speakers. I think we heard a little bit of Madonna's speech, but that was it. And for us, it wasn't about what was happening on the stage. I've been later able to listen to many of those speeches on YouTube, but that was another part of the march. Here we were speaking to each other and we were sharing in conversations. And for me, that was really thrilling. There were people, as I said, from lots of different walks of life. A lot of gentlemen were there with their spouses or on their own. Liked lots of the signs that said, "I'm with her." But they were also proponents. They were wearing pink hats. They were wearing star stickers and carrying signs. And for me, it was exciting. I had a chance to interview a couple of young men too.
I just am curious why you're here at the march today. Tell me why you came.
Like specifically?
Yeah, what was the thing that caused you to just have to be here today?
I was raised by 2 amazing women, my sister and my mother, and they're not here with me today, but I mean, they're here, just not here.
Yeah.
And I felt like this is the least I could do is show my support, and I just think what's being discussed in terms of healthcare rights and access is just very important, so there's no reason not to be here, I feel like. So.
Great. Where are you from?
I live in Brooklyn, but I'm from Florida originally.
All right, great. How about for you?
I'm here because I think it's about making a statement, right? So even though someone did come into power and feels like he might be entitled to kind of make some certain decisions, this is a reminder when he sees the pictures and when he sees all these people and when he sees all these signs, this is going to be a reminder to him that, you know what, he doesn't have a clean bill to do whatever he wants. Like, there are a lot of people that are going to hold him accountable.
All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
At one point, after a huge uproar and a little bit of music from Madonna, it was clear that people were marching. There was actually movement happening in the street. We weren't just standing anymore. And so we joined in. A police car sort of came through the crowd. We parted for it, we cheered for it, and we followed in behind it and began to walk up Independence Avenue. And it was exciting that we were actually starting to move. And it seemed like we were headed to the Washington Monument. And at one point we did hear from some loudspeakers to walk to the Washington Monument and take a right. And so I think people all along the mall, as well as those of us moving down Independence Avenue, were heading in that direction.
That was just
This just shows the corner of 12th and Independence, and we were walking down the street, and then we took a right just after this open part of the road and walked here in towards the rest of the march. So it was exciting. It's a picture of me trying to connect with all of you and interviewing people. So it was fun to be able to share this experience through the voices of others.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! We go high! We go high!
As we were walking down, again, more chants, more shouts, more conversations on the street, but we actually began to get a glimpse of the Washington Monument, so we knew we were headed in the right direction. We didn't really need a lot of direction. We just basically followed the crowd. And when we got closer to the Washington Monument, we actually got to the National Mall, and this is just at the edge of the National Mall, where we joined an even larger crowd of people that have been filling the mall. So we got to see the sense of how many other people were there, just besides the folks that were around us.
This is what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
For me, it was important to make it to the Washington Monument, to make it to the mall. It was so exciting. I've been to Washington so many times. I've walked the National Mall so many times, but to kind of be at this pillar of democracy, this pillar of our system, it was important for me to spend some time there during this historic day and to realize that this was democracy in action, and that was actually one of the chants that we heard throughout the day. This is what democracy looks like. Another one of my favorite chants was, this is what community looks like. When we got to the mall, the even larger crowd, this picture on the left is looking up in towards the National Mall. We began with a group of people walking down the street, and all of a sudden there were hundreds of thousands of people around us as we walked by the National Monument. These pictures are taken from showing the March of the People right in front of the National Monument. We moved up towards it a little bit closer so that I could take some pictures of how large the crowd was moving in front of the National Monument here. And people were pouring from all directions into that particular place. This is sort of some panorama shots showing the number of people that were there in this area around the Washington Monument. There's a little bit more openness once you get to the mall, so we could step out of the march for a little bit and just kind of take it all in and get a sense of how many people were there. So these are some kind of wide-scale panorama shots of what we were seeing. For me, the buildings, the sites of Washington also always enkindle in me a sense of patriotism. And for me, I really felt that I was exercising my patriotism, my concern about our country on this day for this march. So these are some shots from the Washington Monument, actually looking back towards the Capitol building. They had this huge, almost like a beach ball kind of balloon picture of the Earth, and you could go up and touch it, and it was up by the Washington Monument. A lot of people were just wanting to go give Mother Earth a hug that day, and so it was kind of fun to have the Earth. It was actually on some PVC pipes, and they had carried it up to the base of the National Monument on their shoulders, which is kind of a cool thing to see. From the Washington Monument, you can actually look out towards the White House, and this is a picture looking from the monument out towards the White House. You'll see the march went past the monument and up and filled in the space in front of the White House. So this place is full of people, and we finally found the porta potties. They were all up here. So that was exciting. A little too late for our needs, but it was fun to see them. We saw these people by the White House, and yet people were still pouring in. They were still marching in many, many numbers down towards the White House. By the time we got to the Washington Monument, this was about 4:30 or so. We were all pretty tired. Feet were tired, the kids were tired, I was tired. I think we were not alone. If you've ever been to a yoga class and done feet up the wall, this is what it looks like when you are using the Washington Monument to stretch your legs and rest your feet. It was kind of a fun thing to take a picture of. And I didn't know if I could get back up if I got down there, so I chose to not do it that day, but my grandkids did. I love the picture on the right from the monument looking out towards the Lincoln Memorial. There were also people gathered. There was a crowd on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. You could see they were all along the reflecting pools, so it was pretty much the entire mall had pink hats everywhere. So we decided that we probably needed to not wait till the very end because it had taken us so long to get there on the metro. We wanted to begin the journey back while we still could. So we, about 5 o'clock or so, we began to walk back to the metro station we were at. So we were around in here, and we walked back to this particular metro station, and our destination was here at College Park over in Maryland. Again, we had happened to find this campground that rented cabins that we could stay at, and there was no other lodging, and we were thrilled to have this little cabin that we could stay at. It was just a delightful place, but we had to navigate the metro. The crowds were not as bad getting back on the metro. We were able to get on. It was moving fairly quickly until we got right here. And all of a sudden we were stopped at the station for about 10 minutes, and then they told us that the metro, we all needed to get off, that the subway cars that we were on were out of service, and that we would have to wait for the next one to come along. So everyone who was on the subway got off, and we were standing there pretty tired, kind of hungry from our day, and waited for a little bit. All of a sudden we saw a lot of emergency vehicles come up, and then they announced that they were going to have to take some EMTs and emergency workers into the metro. I think there was something that had happened. I don't know if somebody fell into the subway at the next station, but it was obvious we weren't going anywhere fast. So I got to use my Uber app for the first time, and we called an Uber, and within 10 minutes there was someone there that picked us up, and they took us all the way to our little campground. We were delighted because we didn't have to go anywhere to get food. They had a cafe there. We had a hamburger and basically fell into bed at the end of the day, pretty exhausted. So what do you do the day after the march? Well, you happen to be in Washington and you can't fly home till the next day, so you go to the National Air and Space Museum. We did so. We saw lots of people with pink hats there, and interestingly, they were standing right next to people with "Let's Make America Great" and Donald Trump t-shirts. I thought it was such a wonderful coming together, and that we may have different perspectives. There are places where we can come together. We have commonalities too, and to enjoy the wonderful advances that we've made in our country around space and air travel was a place we could come together. So that was pretty exciting.
So you invited your mother to join you on the march. Tell me about why that was important to you.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed just obvious. It seemed after the election, I was just sick of and offended by the leadership that was elected and the way they treated and talked about women and minorities. And I wanted to stand up for that group and felt like I needed to invite my wife and my family and my mother to come to the march with me to support a large agenda of issues that need to be addressed in this country.
For you, what do you think is the most important issue that brought you to the march?
I mean, I think in this election, it's the kind of devaluing of the feminine. I think that's the cornerstone of the issues in our that affect a lot of the topics in this country. Or that I feel like it's like the devaluing of the feminine is at the point, because that addresses a lot of other issues. I think that becomes the devaluation of empathy, and the empathy for others, the empathy for minorities, for immigrants, for the environment, for the care of others. And I think which addresses health care for the people, environmental issues, issues about refugees, issues about Islamophobia, or how to combat Islamophobia, how to combat sexism, how to combat homophobia. I think a lot of that, the point of that, I think, originates in the devaluation of empathy and the feminine. Mm-hmm. And so I think inviting my mother and my wife to come, and actually my wife leading, looking for leadership from women and the minority groups that are affected by these issues, mm-hmm. and standing with them to show my support for them.
What will you teach your children about the march?
That when you can include everybody's issues, I think the platform of the march addressed a lot of different issues that affected a lot of different people. And I think if you have a platform that's large enough, you'll get enough people out to support that platform and move it forward. And I think the important part about this march is that it addressed racism, it addressed sexism and environmentalism, all under the same framework. And I think they're all interrelated. And I think it's a huge step forward in how we rethink feminist issues and environmentalist issues, as they're all related to the same thing.
What are you planning to do after the march?
I think refocus as an artist. I think refocus the issues in my work. I think I deal with landscape in my work and kind of the degradation or collapse of landscape, and try to think more articulately about that narrative in my work, but also outside of that. Rethinking, I think the election was a wake-up call for me in terms of my engagement with my own local community and the people in my life, my immediate surroundings, and try to make an effect there. And also provide and continue to support a platform for other women in my life to have a voice, either in the arts or in politics, and support them, continue to support them.
Thanks. Anything else you want to share about your experience here?
I mean, I think as a male, I think I continually have a dialogue with my own wife about issues of gender equality, having 2 kids. I think we constantly are building a dialogue to make our lives more equal and more just and more of a nurturing environment for our kids. And I think we need to have this conversation as a country, because we haven't been speaking to each other, and I think we need to have some serious conversations as a country, and I hope that this march can catalyze that movement to be able to move forward.
On Monday, I left to come back to Grand Junction. Again, that was the soonest flight I could book out. As I was booking flights, I had to say goodbye to my sweet, loving grandkids. Of course, I had to knit one more pink hat for the little seal that went the whole way on the march with us. I said farewell and hopped on the airline wearing my pink hat. In Washington, D.C., there were lots of us there trying to get back to our respective places. I had mine as I walked onto the airplane, and when I sat down, literally people were walking down the aisles, touching me on the shoulders, squeezing my arms, smiling and nodding. And I've never really experienced that on an airplane before, where complete strangers would reach out and shake your hand and squeeze your shoulder. So it was pretty exciting for me to feel that sense of connection, even flying on that flight. Of course, when I got to Charlotte, North Carolina, my first stop, it was a different story. There were a few pink hats, but not so many. My flight from Charlotte into Phoenix was a 4-hour flight, very long. I got up to use the restroom at one point, and I didn't have my pink hat on, but I did have one of my little buttons on. And a woman at the bathroom asked me, "Did you march?" And I said yes. And she had marched in Miami. And she goes, "I got to talk to you." So she came back to my seat after we'd both used the restrooms there, and we had the chance to share our stories, her from Miami and me from Washington, D.C. So it was a neat connection to make with Julie on that flight. I've also had the chance to chat with several others here in Grand Junction upon my return, people who are participated in the march here or in Denver.
So what are you going to do after the march is over?
Continue talking, continue to be active, and I'll be doing lots of calls to my representatives, both in the House and in the Senate, as well as more locally. And I'm also involved with a women's activist group called Women's Activists for Love and Solidarity. So I'll be continuing my work there and expanding that.
Great. Thank you.
So what's next for me? Certainly, I'm very connected in with the American Nurses Association. One of the things that I have signed up for, and I've got the website in case you're interested, is NSTAT. And this is an action page where I've registered, and I get text messages or emails when there's a call to action for the nurses, when we need to contact our representatives in Washington or at our state level to share particular perspectives and concerns about nursing practice or healthcare. So I've clicked back in with that group and am getting regular information from them on things that I need to speak up about as an RN. I love this quote that I have begun to have conversations with many of the people in my life that weren't at the march, people who are very much in favor of the current administration. Because for me, as you saw, access to safe contraception, including safe abortion, is one of the things that I was at the march for. And you know, I think that being opposed to abortion, as Sister Joan Chittister said, doesn't necessarily make you pro-life. As a public health nurse and a nurse in this community, it's not just about helping children be born, but it's making sure that they are well educated and fed and housed, and they have access to health care. And so I think that we can't just be pro-birth for the sake of being pro-birth. We also have to look at what are the social networks that we put around people to help take care of them over time. And so I've begun to work specifically from that type of a platform in my own circle of contacts to have those kinds of conversations. The Women's March on Washington, the next step for them, they've identified 10 actions for the next 100 days. And if you go to their website, you can click in to look at that. And so their first action is to write a postcard to the senators about what matters most to you and how you're going to continue to fight for it in the days ahead. So that's the first action, number 1. And this is just an example of the postcard, very simple, to the point. Many of the people who are talking about political activism are saying don't email, you need to be writing letters, you need to be making those phone calls, and those will have a greater impact. So I've done that and will continue to do these types of actions going forward. I've had so much opportunity to reflect over the last week, and for me this has been one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. For me to participate with this particular march was important. It came together for me as a mom, as a grandma, as a registered nurse, as someone who has been involved in political organizations and boards and commissions at the state and local level. For me, this seemed to be an important action for me to take at this particular point in history. And I thank you for the opportunity to be able to share my thoughts, my experiences with you in this presentation.